Now that it's getting closer to Halloween night, it's time to celebrate by visiting some of the staples of the season, Halloween specials. I love these so much, not only because of how they get into the spirit of the holiday, but for most shows, this is their chance to really branch out and experiment with new designs, story, and horror tones. Looking at some of the ones Nickelodeon had, SpongeBob had an absolute classic one that was the introduction of the Flying Dutchman. Fairly Odd Parents had a pretty fun one with one of the show's few legitimate action sequences. Danny Phantom of course had to have one, it's about ghosts after all. And My Life as a Teenage Robot actually didn't for some reason. Darn it, would have been really cool to have seen one. But what about Invader Zim? One of the darkest, disturbing, and overall messed up shows ever made for kids. How would they handle a Halloween special where things somehow feel even spookier? Well, they decided to turn up the disturbing factor all the way to 11, with even more disturbing designs, locations, and themes. And it's a double-length special, so they can develop it more than a normal episode. Now, I will say it's not as dark as a few episodes. I mean, nothing is going to beat Dark Harvest, but it is still a standout with just how far the show is willing to push its gruesome style. It also has a very interesting subtext to it about one of the main character's psyches, but I'll get to that later. Let's get into Halloween Spectacular: A Spooky Doom. I love the show's titles. The story starts out in Halloween, of course, at school where children are in costumes. Man, I remember when schools used to allow this, that was fun. But Miss Bears is quick to dash people's spirits and say that Halloween does nothing but turn kids into candy-starved zombies, which Zim takes literally as he is absolutely terrified of the costume kids thinking that they're real monsters, a classic trope of the situation, and something the show kinda did before. Zim fully believes that the kids have turned into monsters to feed on his flesh like candy, and thinks that Dib was taken by them since he's absent. But Dib does show up, running and screaming in the hallway as it quickly flashes from some dark cave-like structure until it goes back to normal. Dib is absolutely terrified and disturbed, which weirds out the rest of the class. Dib then somehow disappears for a few seconds when no one's looking and comes back screaming. The class decides he's too crazy and sends the silent workers to take him to the crazy house. Zim uses the distraction to flee the school to prepare his base for the coming trick-or-treaters. Dib pleads for the white coats to understand his dilemma before he disappears, but we see his perspective now in a nightmarish version of the car and sees the warped horror versions of the town. What could be going on? The white coats have been turned to monsters themselves, saying that Dib is the chosen one with a blinking neck, but he can't get more answers until he's warped back to reality. Dib is later interrogated by the white coats, who ask what's going on as he finally gets some answers. Dib experimented with his father's dimensional scope to peek into different realities to prove a theory he had that some paranormal events could be caused by extra-dimensional entities leaking in. He tripled the output to get a better look, but only got a flash of a nightmarish reality. However, these flashes didn't stop, getting worse and worse and more frequent. He is terrified that at the exponential rate it's going, he could potentially get stuck in the nightmare realm. But surprisingly, Dib's father, Dr. Memrane, is in the room and chastises his son for using the dimensional scope. But the white coats come to a conclusion that Dib is just crazy and needs to be held in the asylum indefinitely. Wow, harsh. Also, keep in mind his father is right there, knows about the dimensional scope, and likely that all of what Dib is saying is true, and does absolutely nothing to help him, saying that he was bound to end up there eventually. Yeah, it's stuff like this that really makes it hard to believe that this membrane and the one from Into the Florpus are the same character.
I'm always proud of you.
So I find you here, son. Oh, I suppose it was only a matter of time. My poor insane son.
As Dib is forced into solitary confinement, he warps again to the nightmare dimension, where they really go all out in the design. Look at this place and the angle of the background and the living body type structure all veining and pulsing and the horrific creatures in captivity. And keep to. Invader Zim is no stranger to weird and unique designs, especially in our glimpses off-world to see aliens, but most have solid enough structures and still feel like reasonable life forms. But in the nightmare world, they can go all out with grotesque and practical designs that are so cool, and one guy has a steering wheel in his gut for no reason. And I feel Zim has some of the best background work and composition in Nickelodeon, and are so visceral and detailed and feels lived in. You can really feel Vasquez's comic experience in his compositions, it's so great. Shout out to the series art director, colorist, and just everyone who worked on it. But Dib soon meets a blob-like figure in shadow, who clarifies that Dib is the chosen one, since his entire dimension somehow exists in his own head.
You're insane.
No, well, yes, I am.
They say that the monsters ravaged and destroyed this dimension and seek a way to escape to the real world, and the only way to do so is through Dib's head. Dib thinks if all of this is in his imagination, maybe he is crazy, but it's not long before the monsters take Dib from his cell and strap him to a living straitjacket. Dib asks where they're taking him as the blob answers out of his big head and finally peeks out the shadows, revealing himself to be some type of monster-fied version of himself. How is this possible? Why? But before we can dwell on that, he's taken away out of the facility to a truck. They say the machine is almost ready, but luckily Dib is worked back to his own reality and outside of the asylum. With no other option for help, he reluctantly goes to Zim as his only hope. Zim, meanwhile, sees the trick-or-treaters and sends his entire base into defensive mode, as if it's a zombie apocalypse. What's funny is that this could totally serve as the Halloween episode of just Zim's paranoia of the holiday, but they do a lot more. Dib bursts in and pleads to Zim to help him before he gets stuck in the nightmare world for good, but Zim of course refuses in his usual Zim way.
Smelly mouth filled with corn!
I haven't been eating corn.
Liar!
But it's not long that Dib gets pulled back into the nightmare world for good. As Zim's house, they get immediately spotted by some gruesome monsters, or as Zim calls them,
The Halloweenies!
for making a hasty escape and managing to outrun them. Zim tries to attack Dib as revenge for getting him stuck there, but Dib says that his head's the only way out, so they need to work together. Which is really nice. It's always fun when Zim and Dib are forced to work together. Though it's not long until Dib immediately throws Zim under the bus and tosses him to the Halloweenies, thinking he's the chosen one and he's taken. Man, just look at these designs, they're so gross and gruesome, I love them! As Dib goes to the nightmare version of the membrane house to get the dimensional scope to possibly escape, Zim is taken to the Halloweenies headquarters, the nightmare version of the school, where you find out the leader is a nightmare version of Miss Bitters. This is really weird how we have two notable nightmare monsters based off of people in Dib's life, showing more how this world is in his head. Though ironically, this version of Bitters is more goofy than her real counterpart. Same with a lot of the monsters where, despite their gruesome appearances, they're pretty silly in these scenes, like getting sent to hell, the realm of eternal screaming and restlessness. Invader Zim always used moments like this to its advantage, that despite it having a horrific and disgusting world, the characters are so goofy and situations so silly, it helps to make it feel more lighthearted. Bitters forces them to look for Dib, using Zim as bait, which fails since Dib couldn't care less if Zim got axed, leading to another great moment of goofiness, allowing Zim to escape. I want to take this moment to also appreciate the nightmare world itself. It's not as if the regular world is a utopia, it's practically drawn as a gross and gruesome cesspool, but here everything is silhouetted completely in shadows. All lighting is done in deep purple or dark blue, which is also interesting as blue is a color commonly associated with him. Many of the structures are also given spirally and sharp designs to make them look scarier, and are commonly textured with veiny and neuron-like features, which does make it seem like a living organism, which can make it feel more like this dimension is in Dib's mind. Nightmarish living organism aesthetic is so great for this episode. Also, in the meantime, Zim hopes Gur is okay in the real world against the trick-or-treaters, which it's shown that he is physically attacking the children to steal and consume their candy. But it's nice that Zim really does care for Gur deep down. We cut to Dib finding the nightmare membrane house, and he makes his way to the basement to find the dimensional scope, until he's greeted by a horrifying nightmare version of his father, who quickly captures him and echoes the same words he said at the asylum.
So I find you here. It was only a matter of time.
And not only him, but a nightmare version of Gaz as well, though honestly she's not too much scarier than her real counterpart. Gaz is another character I refuse to believe is the same character as in Into the Florpus.
You're my brother, man. I only torment you because I know you can handle it.
No!
I program them to feed on human flesh.
But yeah, every single notable character, with the exception of Zim and Gur, have a nightmare counterpart inside the nightmare world, which is stated to be a part of Dib's head. There is clearly something going on, but Nightmare Membrane and Gaz take Dib to the school to escape, which Zim does see. Zim can't stand it, has to go back and save Dib, but goes to the Nightmare House to find the dimensional scope, but also one of Nightmare Membrane's high-tech weapons. With Dib now captured, the Halloweenies use this weird techno-organic device to open a portal to the real world, excited to have a new location to ravage and rule. And as the portal is activating, Zim comes in with the Nightmare Mech, frees Dib with a bit of revenge, and deals with the Halloweenie hordes, or just kinda grossing them out with Nickelodeon slime. Nightmare Bitters sees this, and then undergoes a horrifying transformation that kinda reminds you of the scariest transformation from Ben 10, both of them, into a fierce insectoid that scares Zim into fleeing as Bitters and the Halloweenies give chase. They seek shelter in a ditch, using the mech as a defensive turret, as Zim gets to work getting the portal to open and uses the dimensional scope to literally force a way for him to escape.
How do I get back? Good question! But I don't care!
The Nightmare Bitters quickly demolishes the mech as she approaches, which Zim makes a hasty escape. And then, crashing into the real world, we see all the trick-or-treaters knocked out as Gur sits on a pile of stolen candy completely bloated up. How the hell does a robot get fat? Then again, he could just be stuffing the chewed up candy in his suit, like with what was shown in Into the Florpus. With nowhere else to hide from Nightmare Bitters, Dib somehow forces himself through the portal, turning him inside out into a glob of flesh and organs. Freaking gross! Before reforming as the portal closes. But then Nightmare Bitters forces herself through it into the real world, proclaiming it as a new perfect world for her horde to conquer. But in a usual Halloween twist, the monster is legitimately horrified and disgusted by the trick-or-treaters, and especially Giant Gur, that they scream in terror before recoiling back to the Nightmare World as the portal closes for good. So, everyone's happy. Well, okay, Dip's happy and probably Gur. Everyone else is beaten to a pulp, but good enough. The end. But before I go to the final thoughts, I really want to talk about the subtext of this episode, because it might be darker than the actual content of it. Despite everything making it feel like the Nightmare World was just a parallel version of Earth, they repeatedly explain it to be a part of Dib's mind. Somehow, his mind has become a tangible and real world. Either somehow his mind has always been linked to a parallel world, or to me more likely is that the dimensional scope managed to bring it to life in his first contact. Now, I doubt that the Nightmare World is entirely a part of Dib's mind, as Dib is definitely mostly sane, so it's not like he would see the real world in this way. What's more likely is that the Nightmare World is all a part of Dib's subconscious, and houses his worst fears, worries, anxieties, and other such aspects hidden from most of his conscious mind. With that in mind, the monsters could very well correlate to his fears manifested into disturbing creatures. It makes sense that the Halloweenies apparently ravaged their world and made it utterly inhabitable, as it's likely these fears had run amok in his mind for so long they were utterly destroying his psyche. I mean, come on, the Invader Zim Earth is not a utopia regardless of your living situation, not to mention the constant anxiety and torment Dib goes through on a daily basis. And also, nearly every episode ends with him being punished in some way. Also ironic how the nightmare creatures constantly bring up his big insecurity of his big head, to the point that it's their entire MO. Now, most of the Halloweenies aren't representative of other characters like the school children, but there are a few standouts, namely Nightmare Bitters. Since Bitters is the one effectively leading Dib and the numerous other children, of course she would be the boss of the Nightmare World. And Bitters is scary and so unearthly enough, she deserves a spot in Dib's nightmare subconscious as the strongest, scariest, and most powerful monster. Her apathetic and unsettling personality, gladly willing to throw a student under the bus when they annoy her, lends her being an active threat in Dib's mindscape. She's also the only one who has a different form, which could correlate to Bitter's almost eldritch anatomy and presence. Then there's Gaz and Dr. Membrane. Of course, if the monsters are embodiments of Dib's fears and anxieties, then Gaz is obviously going to be there. She's almost always apathetic to Dib's plights and actively looks to be pleased by his suffering, and she can get terrifying when she's mad or determined. Maybe why her Nightmare counterpart doesn't look too different from her normal self. Nightmare Membrane takes on a more ethereal approach, like a living ghost. It's notable that his very first line is exactly what the real Membrane said to Dib when he left them to their fate at the mental asylum.
So I find you here, son. Oh, I suppose it was only a matter of time.
Where maybe that incident particularly created or at least influenced the Nightmare counterpart, as both also callously sent Dib to his fate. Membrane has been a constant source of Dib's anxiety, treating him as just insane and never hearing him out, practically continually ashamed of him, though his role in the Nightmare World is very apt. The most interesting one we see is definitely Nightmare Dib. He is the only monster who wasn't hostile to Dib, and explains some of the history and goals of the Nightmare Realm. Nightmare Dib is possibly a manifestation of Dib's anxieties about himself. Well, for one of Dib's biggest insecurities is his massive head, which honestly isn't even that big compared to the other kids, but it's funny how Nightmare Dib is nothing but head. But look closely. He was in the Nightmare Insane Asylum, and in the brief glimpse we got of him, he is wearing a straitjacket. he even admits that he's insane. Possibly Dib's biggest insecurity is that everyone, even his family, thinks he's insane for his belief in the paranormal to the point of complete social ostracization. And it's possible Nightmare Dib is a manifestation that he really is crazy, no matter how hard he feels otherwise. But the biggest question is, why was there no Nightmare Zim? Zim is Dib's greatest archenemy, the foe he's dedicated his entire life to. Why isn't he one of the biggest monsters in the nightmare world? It could be that Zim is too recent at manifested in Dib's subconscious, but I think it might be something else. The thing is, Dib and Zim need each other. Zim wants nothing more than to be a real invader, and Dib is the only person who treats him seriously as an invader, and validates his ambitions. He treats him like a worthy foe, a foe Zim constantly tries to one-up and defeat. At the same time, Zim is the living target of Dib's ambition, to prove the paranormal real, to prove he's not crazy, to save the planet, and to be a hero. An unproduced episode, Mopiness of Doom, exemplifies this, as the episode would have been about Dib stopping pursuing Zim, as without each other, both fall into a depression of their lives having no meaning. So in a way, Zim is not Dib's greatest fear, he's actually his biggest hope. Or it could have just been an oversight, or couldn't find a way to integrate him into the plot, who knows. But yeah, what a Halloween episode. It does really push this show's disturbing imagery and tone to the next level to make a creepy, haunted, yet fun and goofy Halloween special. And it's practically served as a deep dive into one of the main characters' psyches. How many times do you see that? The subtext was almost as interesting as the actual story. It leads to a whole bunch of questions and speculations I'd love to know more about. I want to know more about how this nightmare world became a reality, or to see other characters properly monsterfied. But it feels just as much as an adventure as it was a horror story. The crew really didn't have to go all out on it as they did, but that's what I love about Invader Zim. It always goes all out. It actually may be my favorite episode of the series. I love pretty much everything about it. It just oozes so much Halloween spookiness and goodness. Shame I don't really see many people talk about it. I really recommend you give it a watch this Halloween, especially if you haven't seen Invader Zim yet. Get ready for one spooky Halloween special. Whew, man, what a disturbing special. At least Invader Zim's Christmas special should be much more festive and cheery and oh god!
Now Santa is going to destroy you!